Hi everyone, it's Paul Tilley and welcome back to the final unit in MR2350 e-business. We're dealing with the final unit, Unit 7, Ethical, Legal, and Taxation Issues in e-business. This unit, you will notice, is covered in Chapter 8 of the 2021 edition and a different chapter in the earlier editions of the textbook, so please be careful where you read. In this unit, we're going to describe why e-commerce raises ethical, social, and political issues. We're going to understand the basic concepts related to privacy and information rights, the practices of e-commerce companies that threaten privacy, and the different methods that can be used to protect online privacy. We understand the various forms of intellectual property and the challenges involved in protecting it, and we understand how the internet is governed and why taxation of e-commerce raises governance and jurisdictional issues. And we're going to identify major public safety and welfare issues raised by e-commerce. First, let's take a look at some of the broad issues here. So the internet and its use in e-commerce have been really pervasive in our society in the last number of years, and obviously it has raised a whole bunch of issues, and we're focused here on the ethical, social, and political ones. There are others as well. But we need to think about them in terms of the basic technological dimensions, okay? If you think about this concept, for example, of ubiquity. Ubiquity means it's everywhere, okay? Because everybody has access to it, or relatively everybody has access to it, that means that people have a window on everybody else. Work, shopping can invade family life. Shopping can distract workers at work, lowering productivity. Use of mobile devices can lead to automobile accidents. We've seen, for example, cell phone use and texting in cars. We've got all kinds of issues that have raised because of our connectedness. Global reach. This means that the technology is really indifferent to national boundaries. It's everywhere. And this reduces cultural diversity in products, which is kind of a good thing. We can think of a world product as opposed to a country product. But it also weakens local firms because with the internet, you can apply and buy stuff anywhere. Look at the next time you go to the post office, look how many boxes are there from Amazon. And that's not stuff being bought locally. And we always think about the fact that, a lot of the product is being produced in the third world or China or other low-wage, low-standard countries that really raise some questions with regards to human rights and these sorts of things. Universal standards. There is one set of technological standards for the internet that allows every device to connect to it. So that standardization is good in one sense. But it certainly increases the vulnerability of malware and hacking attacks worldwide, because if you can get access to one, you can get access to all. And this has the potential to affect millions. We've seen, for example, global shutdowns of Facebook or hack attacks on our healthcare system. These are things that are easily done because everything is interconnected. There's also the issue of richness. Video, audio, and text messaging are possible. With high speed, we have seen the emergence of video. What has that done? Well, organizations like Netflix have really grown. It's really turned television production upside down. We used to have the main channels, then we evolved into cable. Now we're evolving into an internet-based system. And this has increased the variety, but I don't know if it's increased the quality, and it certainly has had some issues with regards to local business, with regards to advertising, and we don't necessarily sponsor our local companies or these sorts of things. We also have the issue in Canada, of Canadian content. What is the content we're looking at? Is it reflective of our society, or is it reflective of somewhere else? And obviously we got issues with regards to what is the content? Is it what we would consider acceptable content? Is it truth? Is it untrue? Is it stretching the truth? These sorts of things come into play. And this is particularly troublesome for people who are young or people who are vulnerable to all of this. We've got interactivity. And, the nature of internet activity in sites has grown tremendously thanks to social media. Most of the reading now, in order to be able to handle millions and millions of inquiries, a lot of the interaction we have is done with bots. So it's a computer we're talking to, not a real individual. This is kind of deceiving because we think we're talking to someone we're really not. And, is this really people on the other end? Is that ethical? And so we got some issues with regards to that. Information density is another big issue. It reduces the information cost, so we can get a lot of information out. That's great. It certainly allows us to distribute and disseminate information very quickly. But because there is so much of it, we're kind of overwhelmed. The possibility of false and misleading information, unwanted information, invasion of solitude, questionability of trust, how authentic are things? These are issues that are coming up because of information density. We also have personalization and customization issues. It's wonderful that we can personalize it, but on the other hand, it opens up the possibility of invasion of privacy for commercial and government purposes that really unprecedented. This kind of the idea of who's watching you. And we also have social technology. The technology enables us to create some sort of a social linkage, true to an extent. It creates opportunities, though, for cyberbullying, abusive language, predators, the siloing effect. We all talk within silos. Generally, like for Facebook, we only see things we agree with, not the things we disagree with. So, again, this issue of surveillance is very, very worrisome on the internet. So now I'd like to give you an example of how we're being surveilled on the internet. I'm just going to go to Google Maps. So just let me get Google Maps here. Google Maps. So here's Google Maps. I'll click on it. Now my computer is set up so that it has it knows its location. Okay, so here I am right now. Okay, this is Clarenville. Okay, on the island of Newfoundland. So there we go. Now, as I say, right off the bat, Google knows where I am. But it's even deeper than that in terms of their knowledge of me. I can go and I can click up here and click on my maps, and I can go and see my what's called location history. It takes a while for this to load up. Let's give it a second. So what this does is Google every single day, because I have a cell phone, and the cell phone is hooked to this, every single day, and most of us have cell phones, so let's assume that it's not just me. Every single day of my life, I take my cell phone with me, so it records my activities on any given day. So you can see here is my locations over, well, since I've been at this for a few years. If I were to take today, so I'm recording this in 2022, I won't pick today because the fact is that I haven't really gone anywhere today. But I'm going to pick April 5th. Okay? April 5th. So as you can see, on April 5th, this is my route through town. This is what I did. This is where I took my phone. And so it knows where I've been. And it tracks where I've been. And not only that, but it tracks the sequence of my day, what I did during the day. So this is interesting because really you could say, well, Google is tracking me. And, they have a history. They have a fairly good history of where I've gone, provided I've taken my phone with me. My phone relays this information to Google. They have a tremendous amount of knowledge about me because of that. Now, why would I have this on, you ask? Well, the fact is that I need my Google location services on my phone in order to be able to use Google Maps or know where I am or be able to reach. So I get some benefit of it, But this is what I'm giving up. So when you say, why is Google free? This is the key bits of information that you are relaying to Google every single day in terms of where you are. This poses some ethical challenges, no doubt. So research has developed a model for assessing ethical, social, and political rights. Okay, you can see it here in this particular graphic. So what we've got is to organize it along the 4 axes, okay? Information rights, property rights, public safety and welfare, and governance. So we need to be able to assess, as I say, the internet relative to ethical, social, and political issues along those axes. So at an individual level, what appears to be ethical, what should I do, is reflected as social and political levels. What should society do? So you can see different levels would look at it different ways. So the major ethical, social, and political issues that have developed around e-commerce can be loosely categorized along these 4 basic dimensions. So let's dig a little bit deeper into the ethical, social, political issues related along the information property, public safety, and governance rights. First of all, let's look at information rights. Now, information rights, we're really asking the question there, what rights do you have to your own personal information? And what rights do businesses have to your personal information? And what rights do you have to businesses' information? So when we think about internet technology, and as I just showed you in the example of Google, there's a lot of information that's being shared, and the technology allows a tremendous amount of information to be shared. And this poses some big challenges because you may not even know you're being surveilled. How do you know? Should they tell you? What can you do about it if they take that information and do something with it? So the battle for digital privacy, as this article in the New York Times pointed out, is an ongoing battle. Companies require that data. They provide us a lot of free services because we trade data for it as opposed to money. If we didn't trade that data, what kind of services would we get? Would we get all of those services such as Google Maps and our location if we didn't give up that data? So it's a bit of a trade-off, and we recognize that there are issues related to information rights. We also have property rights, particularly intellectual property. Intellectual property, as we've seen in our law course, deals with ideas, stuff that comes out of your mind and has value, particularly in the internet environment. And the thing is, because the pervasiveness of the internet and the ability to transfer information is so easy, intellectual property can be shared all over the world. Who's to say that the property rights are going to be protected? Because there are so many jurisdictions and because it is so hard to determine if someone took it and who owns it, that makes it very challenging. I have a little video in here saying how to enforce your intellectual property rights. This is something the Government of Canada built for Canadian businesses who do business abroad. I invite you to watch that film. I can't, obviously, because of intellectual property laws, I cannot show the film here in this video, but it talks about the very issue and the very challenges that Canadian businesses and Canadian individuals are facing right now in the world under the guise of this World Wide Web and how everything is available to everyone. The question is, how do we protect what's ours? We also have governance rights. Now, governance rights, we're really asking that basic question, should the internet be subject to public laws? Okay, who's the lawmaker on the internet? And what then, if we do determine that there is a lawmaker, who is that? What jurisdiction is responsible? If we think about in Canada, provincial jurisdiction, okay, which province? If it's federal jurisdiction, Canada, or if it's international, is it some other place in the world? And because of the fact that, again, the internet does not respect international boundaries, this idea of who controls the internet and who manages it is more of a world thing. And there have been movement towards coming up with a world standard, but again, enforcing it is a real challenge, and particularly with regards to selling stuff abroad. How do we enforce contracts, for example? And that's a big issue right now on the internet. This particular article right here by Michael Geist that I've linked talks a lot about some of the key decisions, so I invite you to take a look at that. Finally, we have public rights. Public rights deals with public safety and welfare, okay? So what efforts should be really be undertaken by these internet companies to ensure equitable access? And what, is it everybody can get access to this? What effort should government take to ensure that, for example, communities that are so far flung, that are so far removed from the internet backbone that it's very difficult for them to have access to the internet? So what role should government have to do that? Is this a private thing or a public thing? And we've seen some movement along the way to improve the technology so that it could get access anywhere you are in the world. But governments have an issue here. Should everyone have basic access? And it's a big discussion in the media and a big discussion in the news, and it's a big discussion in governments across Canada. But we also think about online content. Freedom of speech, the fact that people can put things there is one issue. Another issue deals with what things do we want and what things do we not want there. Pornography, gambling, fake news, anonymous tweeting, hateful language, racism. Should those things be allowed, and what do we do to stop them? We also talk about mobile devices in vehicles. This has been a big thing, texting in cars, on the phone, and this sort of thing. All kinds of laws to prevent that from happening. But at the same breath, we want to get screens away from people driving. If you look at the car companies, the screens that they're putting in cars now are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And if you think about it, you say, well, in one breath, we're saying less screens, and in the next breath, the screens are getting larger, there's more screens. And if you look at something like Tesla has a giant screen there, and they've even brought in the concept of self-driving. Who's liable if you have an accident if the car is a self-driving car? All kinds of issues. And again, I have a link here to a Michael Geist article, which relates to some of the issues with regards to online harms and what's going on there in terms of government's view, particularly here in Canada, to that. So all of these come down to some of the key issues, and you want to be aware of what the key issues as we've reflected. And as I say, generally we can break those key issues into those broad categories that are described in that model: information rights, property rights, public service and welfare, and governance, and how it impacts people, society, and politicians. This whole bundle really falls under a category called ethics. And ethics really is the study of the principles that individuals and organizations can use really to determine these issues and determine what's right and wrong and the courses of actions in each case. It's assumed in ethics that individuals are free moral agents who are in a position to make choices that they're free to make. So when faced with alternative course of action, what is the correct moral choice? Extending ethics from individuals to business firms and even entire societies can be really difficult, but we think that it can be done. So as long as there's a decision-making body or individual, such as a board of directors, a CEO, these sorts of things, or a government body or society or laws, decisions that they make can be judged against a variety of ethical principles. And if we look at ethical principles, we can break it down into 4 basic principles. First, there's the concept of responsibility, and it means that a free moral agent, us, individuals, organizations, society, are responsible for our own actions. We have choice in making our actions one way or the other. So we're responsible for that. We are also accountable. It means that individuals, organizations, societies should be and are held accountable to others for the consequences of their actions. Liability is the third issue and extends to the concept of responsibility and accountability to the area of law. So liability is really a feature of political systems in which a body of law is in place that permits individuals to seek damages if they've been wronged. So this is an accepted practice in civil society that The law is there to right wrongs if wrongs are made. And the final issue is due process. Due process is really a feature of law in our society that refers to the process in which laws are known and understood. People should know their rights and know their ability to appeal to higher authorities to ensure that laws are correctly applied and are done so in a manner that is fair to everybody. So further developing ethical principles, what are some of the rules of thumb for assessing whether something's ethical or not? First of all, we apply something called the golden rule. And everybody should be familiar with what golden rule is. It really is do unto others as you would expect people to do unto you. And putting yourself in the other person's shoes is important here. Thinking about yourself as the object of the decision can help you think about fairness in the decision making. What would you do if? That's what you think about with regards to the golden rule. We also have universalism, and really what we're asking here is if an action is not right for all situations, then it's not right for any specific situation. So you ask, if we adopted this rule in every case, could the organization or society survive? That's the basic thing there. So it's basically the blanket coverage rule. We also have this concept of the slippery slope. So if an action can't be taken repeatedly, then it's probably not right to take it at all. So an action may appear to work in one instance, but does it solve the problem for every single instance? And if the answer to that is no, then we say, let's not go down that road because it's a slippery slope. If we start making decisions based on one-offs and they don't work for everything. We've also got the collective utilitarian principle, which says take an action that achieves the greater value for everybody. So it's the greater good rule. It assumes that you can prioritize values in rank order and understand the consequences of various courses of action and make a rational decision based on that. We also have risk aversion, which takes the action that produces the least harm or has the least potential cost. Some actions have extremely high failure cost and very low probability, such as building a nuclear generating facility in an urban area, or extremely high failure costs of moderate probability, speeding an automobile accident. We want to avoid the high failure cost actions and choose those actions whose consequences would not necessarily be catastrophic, even if there was a failure. So again, it's minimizing risk. We also got the no free lunch rule. We also have the no free lunch rule, which assumes that virtually all tangible and intangible objects are owned by somebody, and we assume that they're owned by somebody else. So we have to assume that it's not ours unless we're absolutely crystal clear that it is. So if something someone else has created is useful to you, it has value to you, you should assume that the creator wants some compensation for that. We also have the perfect information, or I'll call it the billboard rule. And effectively what that says is it assumes that the results of your decisions on no matter what you make, it doesn't matter what your decision is. If you got to ask yourself, if I put that decision on a billboard that everybody could see, would I feel okay with that? Okay? So I need to publicly pronounce my decision. How do I feel if everyone in the public is looking at it? So we need to think about it from a perfect information perspective. Everybody knows the decision you made, so as a result, you will make better decisions because of that. That's the basic theory. And we also have the social contract rule. And it really asks, would you like to live in a society where the principle you are supporting would become an organizing principle for entire society? For instance, you might think it's wonderful to download illegal copies of Hollywood movies, but you might not want to live in a society that does not respect property rights. So you have to think about, okay, maybe you'd like to do something, but what would society as a whole feel about it? And if society as a whole does not benefit from it, it's probably not a good idea from a social contract perspective. These ethical dilemmas are common. Every decision we make has an ethical element to it. You need to be aware of that. You need to be aware of both sides and weigh them. And again, look at some of those rules of thumb to kind of think about what would be the best decision. So having reviewed that, you know that ethical dilemmas should be pretty common out there in our world. So what do? Well, we have to develop some methodology to assess ethical dilemmas. Here we have a 5-step process. And this is a suggested way in order to be able to resolve ethical dilemmas. First, we have to clearly identify the facts. What is it that is the nature of the problem here? So find out who did what to whom, and where, and when, and how. And we're going to find that in many instances you'll be surprised that the errors in the initially reported facts are often not real. We're not getting the facts straight. So are the facts the facts? And it's important to get the opposing parties involved and get their point of view too, because that way you've got a balance of perspectives. The second thing we need to do is define the conflict or dilemma and identify the higher order values involved. And what that means is, in terms of ethical, social, and political issues, they always reference higher values. Otherwise, there is no debate. So the parties to a dispute all claim to be pursuing higher values: freedom, privacy, protection, all these wonderful things that we all ascribe to. So if we had supporters using advertising networks such as Google Marketing to argue that the tracking of customer movements online increases market efficiency and the wealth of the entire society, but on the other hand, opponents are going to argue that the efficiency comes at the expense of individual privacy. We need to really see both sides. And what are the merits of both sides? Third, we need to identify the stakeholders. Who's involved here? Every ethical, social, and political issue has stakeholders. And these are players in the game who have an interest in one particular outcome or another. They're invested in the situation and they usually have very vocal opinions. Find out the identity of those groups and what they want. This will be useful in helping resolve the problem. The fourth thing is to identify the options that we can reasonably take. So you may find that none of the options satisfies all the interests involved. Certainly not. But that some options do a better job than others. So again, we're not looking for perfect. We're looking for the best. Sometimes arriving at a good or ethical solution may not always be balancing of consequences to the shareholders or stakeholders. Sometimes arriving at a good ethical solution may not always be balancing of consequences to stakeholders. The fifth thing is we need to identify the potential consequences of your options. Some options may be ethically correct but disastrous for other points of view. Other options may work in this one instance but not in similar instances. So we always ask ourselves, what if I choose this option consistently over time? And again, would it work for every situation? That's certainly something we want to do. The next issue we look at here is privacy, offline and online. So privacy is arguably one of the most complex ethical issues raised by e-commerce, as well as the changing technology of human communications brought on by the internet and mobile devices. So the claim to privacy rests on the moral right of individuals to be left alone, free from surveillance or interference from other individuals or other organizations, including the state, government. So privacy is one girder supporting freedom. Without the privacy required to think, write, plan, and associate independently, and without fear, social and political freedom, particularly freedom of expression, is weakened and perhaps destroyed. So you can't have a democratic society without privacy. So we're looking at it from an information privacy perspective. So let's just look at this aspect. So individuals have a moral right to be able to control and use whatever information is collected about them, whether or not they consent it to the gathered information or not. The individuals should be able to edit, delete, shape, and use the use of their online personal information by governments and business firms. Individuals have a moral right to know when information is being collected about them and must give their consent prior to collecting their personal information. This is the principle of informed consent. Individuals also have the right to personal information due process. The process of collecting, sharing, and disseminating personal information must be fair and transparent to everyone. Systems of personal information, whether public or private, must be publicly known. There's no secret systems, in other words. They ought to operate according to a published set of rules, which are terms of use policies, and describing how governments and firms will use the personal information and define ways in which people can edit, correct, or shape their personal information in systems and records, such as, for example, if you think about your credit score. How can you go and adjust that? It could be wrong. It could affect you from a financial perspective. Fourth, individuals have the right to have their personal information stored in a secure manner. Personal record systems must have procedures in place to protect personal information from intrusion, hacking, and unauthorized access. It's important to note that while privacy and security are not the same, they're linked. So without security of personal information, there obviously can't be any privacy. In Canada, privacy laws have been developed around the internet. For example, the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act, or PIPEDA, is an example of a piece of legislation in Canada that outlines what companies who collect information or individuals who collect information about others have to do with respect to respecting people's privacy and ensuring the security of their information. So, PIPEDA is coupled with the Privacy Act, which is a piece of legislation that deals with privacy. It's been around for years. And both of those are really administered by the Office of the Privacy Commissioner of Canada. And the data protection and privacy applies to all sorts of business entities, both private and public entities, as well as most not-for-profits. So PIPEDA, which I have a link to here, and you need to really go take a look at some of the aspects of it, it really includes provisions for protecting data related to many types of business transactions, and it explains it in a document here that I brought up. And you can see, for example, the Office of the Privacy Commissioner has a website that clearly outlines many of the things that are related to internet transactions and e-commerce. So really, that legislation covers transactions conducted on not only national level, but international. So it means that companies not based in the country but have significant presence are really must be complying with the provisions found in the law. So, for example, Facebook, based in the United States, has to apply the Canadian rules when operating in Canada. The Privacy Act identifies how government can utilize the personal information of a Canadian resident. There's also provisions related to what steps the entity must take in order to protect the data. This includes taking reasonable precautions about data breaches and how it should impact any resident residing in any province. So Revenue Canada, or Canada Revenue Agency as it's now known as, for example, has an extensive piece on their website that outlines what they do in order to protect your privacy. We also deal with intellectual property rights, and intellectual property rights encompasses all the tangible and intangible products of human mind. Stuff that comes out of people's heads. So as a general rule in Canada, the creator of intellectual property owns it, so you own it. You're not forced to register it, but in order to ensure that it is yours, you need to register it. So on the internet, once intellectual works become digital, it becomes difficult to control who accesses it, and that's the fundamental problem. So international intellectual property laws seek to address this and make sure it's controlled. So we really need to strike that balance between intellectual property ethics and law to ensure that the creators of intellectual property can receive benefit from their work, but also society can benefit as well. In terms of governance, who has control? Well, who is controlling the internet? It's really a typical question that is asked, and who controls all of the e-commerce processes. So really, when we think about governance, it is a huge issue because there are so many jurisdictions involved. Taxation is a particularly challenging one because it means dollars and cents. So in Canada, Europe, United States, governments rely on sales taxes as part of the money that comes into the government coffers. So in Canada and Europe, these taxes are collected along the value chain, we call it the goods and services tax, but it's generally known as a value-added tax. That means every time it's sold, the tax is collected on the additional value that's added.